On the morning of November 18th, the silence finally broke. For weeks, 3I Atlas had drifted through the inner solar system like a ghost, cold, inert, and suspiciously immaculate. But when the first Chinese deep field images arrived, every assumption scientists had built around this object collapsed in an instant. This wasn't a comet, it wasn't an asteroid, it wasn't behaving like anything natural. And in China's newest photos, it was doing something no interstellar object has ever been recorded doing. It was spinning, clean, deliberate, and controlled. Before we go deeper, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to see is the most unsettling behaviour any interstellar visitor has ever shown, and it begins with a rotation that should be impossible. NASA had already quietly detected anomalies, heat signatures forming geometric grids, infrared pulses arriving like clockwork, and a strange orientation lock that held the object steady with satellite-grade precision. But China's new sequence didn't just confirm these findings, it escalated them. For the first time, the reflective notch along 3I Atlas's equatorial ridge, first flagged when the object faced Earth 6 times within a 66-minute window, began to reappear with mechanical regularity. No wobble, no drift, no natural spin, just a perfectly repeating sweep every 11 minutes. This was not a rock reacting to sunlight. This was a system executing a maneuver. Temperature maps across the surface revealed something even more jarring. As the spin increased, the hexagonal thermal nodes distributed across its skin began firing in tighter, synchronized rhythms, like an engineered cooling architecture compensating for new internal load. These heat nodes didn't obey terrain. They ignored fractures, seams, ridges, because they weren't formed by geology. They were responding to commands, and the timing of those responses matched something else. Exactly as the object began its controlled spin, it emitted a narrowband infrared burst lasting 5.93 seconds, a pulse so smooth one observer called it surgical. Fourier breakdown showed something no natural emission has ever displayed. Recursive harmonic structure, 3 rising peaks followed by a mirrored inversion, like a digital packet header bracketing encoded data. It was unmistakably a transmission, but not to us. Because when NASA, ESA and JAXA triangulated the signal, the answer made the room go silent. The beam wasn't tracking Earth at all. It was locked onto a fixed celestial point 2 light-years away, a location nothing occupies now, but something passed through 2 years ago. A predictive broadcast. Not reactive, not adaptive. A message meant for someone else. But the true shock came 11 minutes later. As the reflective notch swept past Earth again, the same burst fired with the same timing, the same structure, and the same amplitude. Every pulse aligned perfectly with rotation angle, as if part of a scanning arc, like a lighthouse looking for a reply. Only nothing replied. Then came the moment that terrified every observatory on 3 continents. For exactly 87 seconds, radio reception around 3I Atlas collapsed into a perfect null zone. Not interference, not distortion. Total engineered silence. Electromagnetic waves simply disappeared within a 300-meter sphere around the object, like a cloaking field. Then it shut off instantly. Square wave instantaneous. Something no natural system can do. But China's images revealed something no one else had caught yet. As the object spun, tiny reflective microflares appeared along the ridge, angle-dependent flashes synchronized with its internal 11-minute cycle. These were not glints from rough terrain. They were phase-steered reflections, a trait associated with photonic crystals and metamaterials, the kind of exotic optical engineering used on Earth for early stealth and communication prototypes. Natural bodies do not steer light. They scatter it. 3I Atlas was aiming it. This is when the narrative inside global space agencies shifted. The rotation wasn't random. It wasn't caused by heat torque or tidal forces. The object was choosing its orientation and holding it with mathematical precision, aligning within 0,2 of a fixed barycentric vector between Earth and the Sun. Not orbiting, not tumbling, pointing. Then something even stranger happened. The plasma environment behind the object began bending, being drawn inward, not pushed outward. As if the object were harvesting high-energy protons from the solar wind, models showed the structure behind it wasn't a tail at all, but a magnetic reconnection funnel, identical to theoretical MHD drives proposed for propulsion without mass ejection. A vessel using the star as fuel. While this was happening, something else quietly occurred closer to Earth. At 11Her UTC, satellites from Starlink, Galileo and China's Beidou network all glitched at the same instant. Identical timing errors and dropouts lasting 11 seconds, aligned perfectly with the object's pulse cycle. The harmonics matched frequencies known to be used in human telecommunications, but rare in natural astrophysical emissions. 3i Atlas wasn't just emitting energy, it was interfering, deliberately or incidentally, with orbiting infrastructure. And yet the object never shed a gram of dust, no coma, no tail, no sublimation. Its surface temperature remained controlled, adaptive, self-regulating across geometric heat tiles pulsing like a heartbeat. Nothing reacted to the sun the way it did. Nothing survived perihelion and came out cleaner. Nothing rotated with this kind of purpose. No comet does this. No asteroid does this. Nothing natural does this. Which leaves only one conclusion. One scientists across the world are now whispering but not daring to publish. 3i Atlas isn't spinning because it's changing trajectory. It's spinning because it's preparing for something. By the time 3i Atlas completed its second full rotation cycle, the data streaming in from NASA, ESA and Chinese observatories had begun revealing something that no one wanted to believe. The surface behavior was already impossible. Hexagonal heat tiles pulsing in organized sequences, metamaterial-like reflections steering light, and an 11.37-second pulse cycle so precise it could rival an atomic clock. But as analysts dug deeper, they found hints of something far more unsettling. The object wasn't solid. It had an internal structure, layered, regulated, and frighteningly organized. ESA's thermal inversion models were the first to detect it. The heat wasn't coming from the crust. It wasn't even emerging from shallow pockets. The strongest emissions originated 40 meters beneath the surface, radiating upward through geometric channels like arteries. Natural bodies don't move heat like this. They crack, flake, and fracture. But 3i Atlas redistributed thermal load with the balance of a living network, or the precision of a engineered one. When researchers layered this data with the real-time reflectivity shifts captured by China's ultraviolet spectrometers, the picture sharpened. The interior wasn't chaotic. It wasn't molten. It was regulated, synchronized in lockstep with the surface shifts and the infrared bursts, almost like the heat was being routed along circuit-like pathways, or like a machine adjusting load to protect a core. The tension skyrocketed when the James Webb Space Telescope provided its next set of frames. Instead of chaotic cooling after solar exposure, Webb recorded adaptive phase changes across tiles, absorbing radiation, dimming, then brightening in patterns that mirrored the waveform of the solar flare that struck it just 14 seconds earlier. It wasn't reacting randomly. It was reading the flare and responding. And then came the true anomaly, a phenomenon that left thermal physicists speechless. During one flare, the entire object entered a state of sudden electromagnetic silence, an 87-second radio null field where all incoming and outgoing signals vanished. No noise, no turbulence, just a perfect void centered around the object. Then it shut off instantly. Not gradually, instantly. Only two systems on Earth are theorized to do this. RF cloaking metamaterials, resonance-based energy shielding, both require deliberate engineering, and yet 3i Atlas didn't just block radio waves, it did so in sync with its internal heat pulse. This wasn't a rock, this wasn't a comet, this was a system managing energy, regulating exposure, protecting something beneath its skin. For the first time, researchers began asking the question they'd avoided for weeks. What is inside 3i Atlas? Because whatever it was active. On November 16th, deep inside JPL's trajectory verification hub, a junior analyst noticed something small, almost insignificant. A 0.007 degradian deviation in 3i Atlas's path. A rounding error, a glitch, a meaningless offset. Except it wasn't. Scaled across interplanetary distance, that tiny angle translated to 920 kilometers of lateral displacement. And unlike natural drifts caused by outgassing or solar pressure, this movement had no physical cause. 3i Atlas hadn't been pushed, it had changed direction. ESA and JAXA confirmed the finding within hours. The deviation wasn't random, it was a smooth vector shift, unfolding like a planned maneuver. No wobble, no stagger, no reactive correction. A perfect curve, mathematically aligned with the internal thermal pulse. Then NASA's Deep Space Network detected something that sealed the implication. A faint trail of cold, structured infrared residue extending from the object's previous path. Something analysts called field drift signature. Not exhaust, not heat. A theoretical phenomenon associated with non-Newtonian propulsion, where the object manipulates its inertia instead of pushing mass. At the same time, cameras aboard the solar orbiter captured a structure no one was prepared for, a plasma funnel stretching over 14,000 kilometers behind the object. Not a tail, a funnel, a precise inward curving sheath drawing high-energy protons from the solar wind. It wasn't ejecting matter, it was harvesting it. This is the hallmark of theoretical MHD propulsion, using a star's plasma as both intake and thrust vector without combustion or jets. A technology that does not exist on Earth, even in prototype. But as the funnel strengthened, something else happened. 3I Atlas accelerated. Not by much, just enough to break every model predicting its outbound arc. Instead of following the expected hyperbolic trajectory toward the Kuiper belt, it shifted toward the ecliptic plane, toward the inner system, and toward a path that would take it dangerously close to Earth. And just as this deviation occurred, satellites in mid-Earth orbit experienced coordinated interference, brief signal dropouts, phase errors, timing corruption, all lasting 11 seconds, all matching 3I Atlas's pulse cycle. This was no longer observation. This was interaction. 3I Atlas wasn't drifting, it wasn't falling, it wasn't reacting, it was navigating quietly, smoothly, purposefully. And as it moved closer, the world realized the most disturbing possibility yet. It wasn't heading toward the sun. It was heading toward us. Every interstellar object that has ever wandered into our inner solar system follows the same rule. When you approach the sun, you die. Icy bodies boil, rock fractures, dust erupts into jets, surfaces disintegrate until only rubble escapes back into the dark. But 3I Atlas broke that rule the same way it broke all the others. As it swept through perihelion, close enough that any comet would have exploded into a spray of gas, astronomers around the world waited for the telltale signs of thermal collapse, a coma, a tail, jets, shedding, anything. They saw none. Not a fleck of dust, not a whisper of vapor, not a single molecule of outgassed material. Instead, the object became more stable. Alma caught the first anomaly. Its mid-infrared pulses didn't weaken under solar heat. They sharpened. The 1137-second cycle grew cleaner, tighter, more defined. Then the James Webb Space Telescope confirmed the impossible. No water vapor, no carbon monoxide, no cyanogen, no chemical signatures whatsoever. None of the substances every comet bleeds when it passes too close to the sun. 3I Atlas's surface composition was unchanged, unaffected, unafraid. Even stranger, the light curve, normally chaotic after solar heating, became smoother, as if the object had healed, annealed, like metal strengthened in a furnace. Something that happens in factories, not in nature. But the most disturbing clue came from a faint glow detected behind the object. Not a tail, not a plume. A thin electromagnetic sheath hugging its surface like a skin, a magnetic envelope. Models showed this glow came not from material loss, but from containment, as if the object were actively preventing any mass from escaping. Even NASA's Stardust 2 probe, flying within hundreds of thousands of kilometers, registered 0 dust impacts. No particles, no debris, nothing. It wasn't just surviving the sun, it was using it. Post-perihelion, 3I Atlas emerged cleaner, sharper, and more stable than before. Its heat signatures synced, its rotation optimized, its surface apparently reinforced. Its pulse cycle didn't drift, its vector didn't degrade, its geometry didn't deform. Physics demanded chaos. Instead, we found precision. A comet doesn't get better after a solar pass. A spacecraft, an engineered spacecraft, might. And for the first time, researchers whispered the unthinkable. Maybe perihelion wasn't a challenge for 3I Atlas. Maybe it was the activation point. For days, scientists believed they were staring at a dormant shell, a matte, dark surface with no reflections, no detail, no clues. But that illusion shattered when the sun delivered its next surprise, a moderate Class B to Class C solar flare. Within seconds of the flare's photons hitting 3I Atlas, the object reacted. Not passively, not thermally, intelligently. According to readings from NASA's Solar Terrestrial Relations Observatory, STEREO-A, the sunward face of the object changed reflectivity within 14 seconds, a transformation far too fast for natural material. Certain sections dimmed to absorb energy, while others brightened as if deflecting it. And then China's ultraviolet spectrometers confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The pattern matched the flare's waveform, pulse for pulse, rise for rise, decay for decay, with delays longer than 1.3 seconds. This wasn't heating. This was reading, interpreting, reacting. The surface behaved exactly like an engineered metamaterial, shifting its optical and thermal properties based on environmental input. But terrestrial metamaterials require circuitry, processors, control systems. 3I Atlas had no visible hardware, no panels, no seams, no mechanisms, yet its skin changed in real time. During the flare, the object's backside began radiating excess heat in symmetrical bursts, just as the front absorbed it, creating a global heat balancing system across its entire surface. Webb recorded this redistribution pattern as a perfect thermal feedback loop. Then came the silence. At the peak of the flare, a spherical radio null zone formed around 3I Atlas, 300 meters wide, 87 seconds long. All radio waves in that bubble vanished, not scattered, not distorted, erased. And as soon as the flare peaked, the silence ended instantly. Square wave sharp, programmed. No natural object manipulates the electromagnetic spectrum this way. Only adaptive systems, stealth systems, can produce a synchronized blackout exactly when internal processes are most energetic. The implication was chilling. 3I Atlas wasn't just protecting itself, it was concealing itself. Scientists compared it to a cocoon, a shielding envelope, a protective mode triggered only when energy input reached a specific threshold. Not all flares activated it, only the one with the right structure. Selective, discriminatory, programmed. If the surface was adaptive, if it responded to energy inputs, if it could alter its own electromagnetic signature, then the object's skin wasn't a surface at all. It was a system, an active shell, a technological interface between the cosmos and whatever was inside, and that left Earth's astronomers with a single terrifying question. If the surface reacts like this, what is the interior designed to protect? On November 18th, 3 of the world's most sensitive observatories, NASA's Goldstone Complex, ESA's Taranis Array, and Canada's CHIME telescope, confirmed something no one ever expected to see from a drifting interstellar object. 3I Atlas was keeping perfect time. Not regular, not stable, not consistent. Perfect. Atomic clock perfect. Quartz oscillator perfect. Machine perfect. Over 72 hours, more than 400 pulses were recorded and stacked. The deviation, 0. No drift, no jitter, no modulation from solar wind. No Doppler distortion. Even pulsars, stellar corpses spinning with the force of collapsed suns, decay over time. 3I Atlas did not shift by a millionth of a second. Its emission interval was 1137 seconds, every single time. And the beam wasn't isotropic, it rotated. Using Doppler phase mapping, researchers discovered the pulse originated from a sweeping emission arc slightly off the equator. That meant one thing. The object wasn't simply radiating energy, it was scanning. Like a radar dish, like a lighthouse, like a system searching for something in a precise direction. Then came the next shock. The beam wasn't targeting Earth, it wasn't correcting for Earth's movement at all. It maintained a fixed celestial vector, unchanged by our orbit, rotation, or perspective. When Earth moved, the beam didn't track us. It simply passed across us like we were irrelevant. After triangulation, the beam pointed toward a location 2 light-years away, a spot now empty, but not empty 2 years ago. Something had been there. Something 3I Atlas may still be talking to. or waiting for. The pulses contained microfluctuations, spikes mere microseconds apart, matching early phase shift keying patterns used in encrypted communication. Not random noise, not chaos, a compressed envelope, a data carrier, and it was getting stronger. Every pulse increased in amplitude by a measurable margin, as if the system were warming up, or synchronizing with something else. Then a final detail chilled the room at JPL. If the pulse cycle is a countdown, if it's aligning with a distant receiver, what happens when the clock reaches its target moment? No one could answer, no one wanted to. Because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't listening to the cosmos. The cosmos was broadcasting through us, and we weren't the intended audience. By now, the world's space agencies knew 3i Atlas was not natural. They had accepted the perfect pulses, the electromagnetic cloaking, the controlled heat, the deliberate navigation, the impossible survival near the sun. But the moment it touched us, everything changed. It happened at 11 for UTC on November 18th. A cluster of satellites across 3 different global networks, Starlink, Europe's Galileo GNSS, and China's Beidou constellation, experienced simultaneous telemetry failures. Not random, not weather-induced, not solar interference. Each dropout lasted just over 11 seconds, the exact timing of 3i Atlas's pulse window. Every system reported the same issues: sudden phase shift errors, broken timing codes, dropouts across positioning signals, atomic clock desynchronization bursts. 3 networks, 3 nations, 3 independent systems, 1 cause, and all affected satellites were on the sun-facing side of Earth, aligned perfectly with the expanding trajectory of 3i Atlas. Engineers ran diagnostics. Nothing was wrong, no anomalies, no hardware faults. The only consistent variable was the position of the object minutes before the error. This triggered an emergency joint session across NASA, ESA, and CNSA. When they overlaid the satellite dropouts on 3i Atlas's emission timeline, the conclusion became unavoidable. Earth had just experienced its first deliberate or incidental technological effect from an interstellar object. Even more disturbing, the interference was harmonic. It occurred specifically on 2.4 GHz and 10.9 GHz, frequencies used extensively in global telecommunications, but almost never produced in natural space environments. 3i Atlas was emitting broad-spectrum bursts powerful enough to corrupt orbiting hardware from over 100 million kilometers away. When ground stations performed controlled timing test, the pattern became crystal clear. Signals transmitted outside the 11:37-second pulse window were stable. Signals transmitted during the pulse collapsed. It wasn't noise, it was a schedule, a protocol. Some speculated the bursts were radar sweeps scanning Earth. Others believed they were calibration signals, attempts to synchronize with another object, perhaps a companion still between us and the sun. But the darkest theory came from JPL's secure group. What if the interference wasn't aimed at Earth at all? What if Earth was simply in the way? What if we were collateral in a communication channel passing through our planet? Because if the beam wasn't for us, if the pulses weren't for us, if the timing wasn't for us, then humanity had just been brushed aside by an intelligent system communicating with something across the void. And the most chilling part, 3i Atlas was still accelerating, still steering, still pulsing, still watching, still silent, and it was still coming closer. For weeks, astronomers believed they had mapped every detectable anomaly around 3i Atlas, its impossible heat signatures, metamaterial skin, perfect pulse timing, silent electromagnetic cocoon, and the plasma funnel behaving like a prototype MHD drive. They were wrong, because on the morning of November 17th, a set of images from ESA's solar orbiter captured something that defied every known law of heliophysics: a magnetically structured plasma funnel, trailing behind the object like the wake of a vessel, not created by outgassing but by intake. Unlike a comet tail, which is chaotic and dispersed, this structure was geometrically perfect. A thin, inward-curving sheath over 14,000 kilometers long, guiding solar wind particles toward a narrow thread-like core. This wasn't gas being pushed away, it was plasma being pulled in. NASA's Parker solar probe confirmed the funnel wasn't random. Only high-energy protons were being harvested. Low-energy particles simply passed by. This required a filtration mechanism, a sorting system. a magnetic scaffold capable of discriminating particle energies in real time. Nothing natural does that. And yet the funnel remained perfectly stable across varying solar wind speeds, as though controlled by an unseen internal architecture. Simulations run at MIT showed the structure matched predictions for magnetohydrodynamic intake fields, theoretical propulsion systems that use stellar plasma, not fuel tanks, to generate thrust by bending local spacetime. Earth has never built one. We barely understand how to model one. We've never even seen one, until now. But the funnel wasn't the only field forming around the object. Radio observatories detected subtle, phase-cancelling shells, a phenomenon only predicted in research papers on electromagnetic cloaking. These shells didn't scatter signals, they erased them, bending radio waves around the object before snapping back with perfect symmetry. Each event lasted 87 seconds, identical to earlier null-zones, and each perfectly aligned with internal thermal activity. These shells were not defensive reactions, they were modes, activations triggered by very specific solar patterns, flare intensities, and pulse cycles. The implication was terrifying. 3i Atlas was operating on a multi-layer field architecture, one layer to harvest energy, one to navigate, one to cloak, and one to protect whatever lay inside. But then came the discovery that turned this from a scientific mystery into something else entirely. When mapping the plasma funnel's orientation, researchers found it wasn't trailing randomly. It was angled perfectly along the new trajectory, the same trajectory that now bent toward Earth. This was not drift. This was not reaction. This was propulsion. And humanity had just discovered, possibly for the first time, an interstellar craft using the sun as its engine. By November 18th, fear inside the global astronomical community had shifted. At first, the terror came from not understanding the signals, then from the perfect pulses, then from the impossible stability during perihelion, then from the plasma funnel acting as propulsion. But now, for the first time, humanity experienced the part no one had dared to imagine: direct, unintended contact. The satellite interference from Segment 8 was only the beginning. Within hours, ground-based radar began showing something even stranger. Across 3 continents, Japan's Yasuda Center, NASA's Canberra Station, and ESA's Seebes antenna, operators reported identical anomalies. Their receivers weren't just losing signal, they were being redirected. Incoming radio waves bent around 3i Atlas before reaching their antennas, not scattered, not blocked, redirected, as though the object had become a gravitational lens for radio frequencies. This effect had no precedent in astronomy. No rock, ice, or dust can bend electromagnetic waves this way, but metamaterials can. Field-based cloaking can. Resonance cavity shielding can. And 3i Atlas was demonstrating all 3. The distortion was so precise that multiple stations recorded their beam-forming arrays sliding around the object as if pushed by an invisible hand. Then the readings stopped. Not because the antennas failed, but because everything inside the 300-meter radius around the object had vanished from the EM spectrum again. An engineered silence. At the same moment, optical telescopes observed a reflective flash, the same reflective notch seen in the rotational cycle, the same feature that fired infrared bursts every 11 minutes. Only this time the flash didn't return to Earth. It reflected toward the same 2 light-year vector identified earlier, the vector where something once was. Then, for the first time, the pulse cycle shifted, not in timing, in strength. The next burst wasn't just stronger, it carried a deeper harmonic, a sub-frequency never detected before, something encoded, something deliberate. This wasn't maintenance, this wasn't calibration, this wasn't scanning, this was communication, not a call, not a beacon, a reply. As if 3i Atlas had finally received the signal it had been waiting for. And the most terrifying part, the moment that harmonic appeared, Earth's satellites glitched again. Ground stations flickered, GPS drifted, timing systems spasmed, even civilian electronics felt it. Humanity wasn't just observing an interstellar system anymore, it was standing in the crossfire of a conversation between something here and something no longer anywhere near our star. By November 19th, one truth had become unavoidable. 3i Atlas wasn't falling through the solar system. It It was steering through it, with precision no natural object could produce. The shift began small, a gentle curvature, a deviation of 0.7, barely detectable, until JPL tracked it across 96 hours and realized it wasn't noise. It was a Bezier-like arc, the same smooth anticipatory curve used in simulated spacecraft maneuvers. No comet follows a Bezier curve. No asteroid anticipates future gravitational wells. No interstellar fragment plans trajectory. But 3I Atlas did. The object's path began bending away from its hyperbolic outbound vector, the route it should have taken back into deep space, and instead drifted closer to the ecliptic plane, closer to the inner system, closer to our orbital lane. And the shift wasn't reactive. It wasn't forced by solar wind, outgassing, or micrometeorite impacts. It was synchronized with the internal pulse cycle, 11.37 seconds between each burst, and now 11.37 seconds between each micro-adjustment of trajectory. Every pulse coincided with a slight reorientation of the plasma funnel behind it. Like a rudder realigning, a sail adjusting to wind it can feel but we cannot. Then came the discovery that sent every mission planning team into crisis mode. NASA's Deep Space Network detected a cold infrared trail behind the object. Not heat, not mass, but field drift residue, the predicted byproduct of propulsion systems that manipulate inertia instead of expelling fuel. It was the first real evidence that 3I Atlas wasn't simply using the plasma funnel to gather energy. It was using it to change direction, but direction wasn't all it was changing. With each incremental course correction, the reflective notch on its equator began returning tighter, sharper, more focused bursts. Each pointed a few fractions of a degree closer to Earth. The object was no longer just broadcasting, it was tracking. When optical telescopes overlaid its pointing vector with its projected trajectory, the impossible became mathematically undeniable. 3I Atlas was on course to pass near Earth, not by accident, not by drift, but by design. Some researchers proposed it was simply aligning with the inner solar plane, choosing a path of least gravitational resistance. Others argued it was preparing for slingshot maneuvering, using the sun for energy, using the planets for stabilization. But the darker theory began to spread quietly among analysts. What if this wasn't navigation at all? What if this was approach? Because no natural object adjusts course with a synchronized internal clock. No natural object uses the sun as fuel. No natural object clamps onto a barycentric vector with satellite precision. And as the spin continued tightening, as the pulses grew stronger, as the plasma funnel bent harder into the solar wind, one truth became harder to ignore. It was coming closer, and it was doing it on purpose. By the evening of November 19th, something changed inside 3I Atlas. Not its pulse, not its rotation, not the plasma funnel, something deeper. The internal heat nodes, those hexagonal rhythmic machine-like tiles, began shifting in a pattern never seen before. Instead of pulsing in independent clusters, they synchronized into a sweeping cascade, a wave rolling from pole to pole like a system rebooting. It was the first time the internal heartbeat deviated from its usual cycles, and as it did, the object's surface began to brighten, not in reflection, but in activation. Segments of the skin entered an anisotropic phase, changing reflectivity by nearly 18% within milliseconds, mirroring an earlier solar response but now triggered without external radiation. It was as if the object was preparing itself. Then came the most terrifying moment yet. For the first time, the 300-meter radio null field didn't form during a solar flare or during a pulse. It formed during silence. No burst, no flare, no external trigger. Just an abrupt, clean drop into total radio invisibility. It lasted 87 seconds, exactly 87 seconds, then stopped, instantly, as if a door had closed. But it wasn't the silence that alarmed scientists. It was what came next. 3 separate observatories detected a faint electromagnetic tremor, a ripple across frequencies typically associated with internal power redistribution. Something inside 3I Atlas had just activated a mode no one had seen before. At that exact instant, its trajectory shifted again. Not a drift, not a curve, a snap, a sudden micro-correction that aligned its vector with Earth's orbital path 6 days into the future. This wasn't celestial mechanics. This was targeting. Then, the pulse returned. Not the usual one. This one carried a new harmonic, a lower, deeper carrier wave embedded beneath the standard 11.37 second envelope. It was undeniably intentional, undeniably structured, undeniably different. It was a mode change. Positioning systems on Earth flickered. GPS drift increased. Communication arrays pulsed with interference. And for 19 minutes, as Earth unintentionally passed through the object's fixed broadcast vector, the beam imprinted a harmonic across dozens of ground stations. Not destructive, but precise, consistent, deliberate. The message was no longer faint, no longer buried, no longer ambiguous. 3i Atlas wasn't simply sending, it was calling, activating, aligning, preparing. And as the internal thermal wave crested across its surface, as the plasma funnel intensified, as the pulses shifted into a pattern no one had ever seen before, the world realized something horrifying. 3i Atlas had not arrived. It was arriving. By November the 20th, the world's observatories had run out of explanations. Not theories. Those were endless. But explanations. Physical models. Anything resembling natural motion. Those were gone. Because 3i Atlas had begun doing something no comet, asteroid probe, or interstellar fragment had ever done in recorded history. It began aiming. Not drifting. Not curving. Aiming. JPL's trajectory reconstruction team noticed it first. While plotting the latest telemetry, a single vector line cut sharply across the projected orbit. At first it looked like an error, another rounding fault, another nanoradian wobble. But when the team overlaid the data from ESA's Gaia platform and Japan's JAXA Doppler array, the truth became unavoidable. The object had executed a two-stage maneuver, a microcorrection, a stabilization period, then a second microcorrection aligning its path with Earth's orbital lane, not on impact course, but on encounter course, close enough to observe, close enough to interact, close enough to choose. That wasn't the only shift. The plasma funnel, once a trailing structure, had rotated several degrees sunward, now acting like a dynamic sail pulling against the solar wind, bending its course like a vessel tacking across a cosmic ocean. This was propulsion. Pure, elegant, physics-defying propulsion, and it was being used with surgical control. As scientists studied its movement, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every time the funnel realigned, every time the internal heat nodes pulsed, every time the radio null field activated, the trajectory sharpened, like a guided system refining its approach vector. But the worst moment came at 0312 UTC, when a network of telescopes in Chile, Hawaii and South Korea caught the object during a rotation phase. For the first time, the reflective notch did not sweep past Earth. It locked onto the planet, held position, tracked. Even as the object spun, the reflective feature compensated, tilting slightly to keep the reflective glint aligned with Earth. Natural bodies don't do that. Machines do. Then, without warning, the harmonic embedded in the object's pulse deepened again. Another step in the unknown activation sequence. Satellites flickered. Atomic clocks drifted by microseconds. Long-range radar suffered localized distortions. All synchronized with the pulse. Earth wasn't in danger, not yet, but it was being acknowledged. That was the moment analysts realized the truth. We were no longer observing 3i Atlas. It was observing us. By late November 20th, something inside 3i Atlas began organizing itself. Not sporadically, not erratically, but with a coherence no natural structure possesses. The internal thermal nodes, those lattice-like grids mapped by the James Webb Telescope, began pulsing in full hemispheric synchrony, forming geometric waves that rolled across its internal layers like coordinated circuits. Every pattern matched its rotational phase. Every pulse matched the 11.37 second cycle. Every fluctuation matched the harmonic suddenly embedded in the carrier wave. 3i Atlas wasn't just powering up, it was aligning. For the first time, scientists noticed something beyond the emissions. A faint mechanical rhythm embedded in the infrared bursts. Tiny amplitude ascents occurring at fractional intervals, mimicking calibration events in Earth's deep space probes. The object wasn't just sending signals, it was tuning itself. More alarming was the object's reaction to solar weather. Hours after the internal synchronization began, A small solar wind fluctuation swept through its vicinity. Normally, such a shift would push a comet slightly, alter its tail, deform its coma. Instead, 3I Atlas responded with a split-second surface modulation, altering reflectivity, redistributing thermal load, and reinforcing the magnetic sheath behind it in 1.3 seconds. It didn't brace against the solar wind, it adapted to it. This wasn't a body reacting to its environment. This was a system communicating with its environment. And then the sky flickered. Every ground station pointed at 3I Atlas reported a sudden polarization shift, an electromagnetic ripple like a bow shock forming in front of the object. Radar beams curved around it, radio signals bent, light scattered in narrow vectors, not randomly, precisely. A field envelope was expanding, not outward, but forward, stretching into the direction of its approach. This was not a shield. This was not propulsion. This was something else, something designed for entry. As the envelope spread, the harmonic sharpened again. The surface brightened. The pulse deepened. The plasma funnel tightened. The internal nodes aligned like a spine of light. And then came the reading that froze analysts at NASA, ESA, and CNSA. 3I Atlas's barycentric alignment had shifted, not toward the Sun, not toward the distant target 2 light-years away, but toward Earth's exact orbital position 6 days ahead. Not Earth itself, the place Earth would be. This wasn't targeting. This wasn't interception. This wasn't coincidence. It was rendezvous. Because whatever 3I Atlas was, whatever it carried, whatever it had been waiting for, it was finally ready, and it was coming to meet something. By November 21st, Earth was no longer a passive observer. It had become part of the geometry. A moving point intersecting the narrow, perfect beam 3I Atlas had been broadcasting into deep space, and for the first time humanity passed directly through that beam. The beam had always fired along a fixed celestial vector, unchanged by Earth's orbit, rotation, or position. It wasn't aimed at us. We were simply in the way. But at 1914 UTC, for exactly 19 minutes, Earth crossed directly through the beam's path. What happened next was unlike any event previously recorded. Satellite clocks drifted by microseconds, positioning networks jittered, timing codes fractured, ground receivers detected harmonic imprints, long-range radar distorted into curved projections, and it all happened without a single change in the object's pulse schedule. The beam did not acknowledge us, alter for us, or react to us. We were not the target, we were the collateral. Signal analysts stacked 72 hours of pulse data. The micro-fluctuations embedded in the beam, once barely detectable, were now pronounced. A deeper harmonic had emerged, a new subfrequency, a structured envelope, tightly encoded. It wasn't just broadcasting anymore, it was transmitting. And the timing of the new harmonic matched the moment Earth passed through the beam, as if the object had finally reached a threshold, a synchronization point, a trigger. Then, in the minutes after the crossing, something even stranger occurred. A faint, barely measurable distortion appeared around Earth's magnetosphere. A localized ripple, imperceptible to the naked eye, but visible in magnetometer arrays across North America and East Asia. A tremor, not from the Sun, not from solar wind, not from Earth, but from the intersection with the beam. 3I Atlas wasn't signaling to Earth. It wasn't scanning Earth. It wasn't reacting to Earth. It was using Earth's passage through its beam as part of a larger activation process. For the first time, analysts openly considered the possibility that the beam had nothing to do with us at all. But something here might be an expected component in its transmission path. A relay, a lens, a reference point. Because the moment the harmonic appeared, the moment Earth crossed the vector, the moment the new encoded layer began pulsing, 3I Atlas's internal nodes began activating in sequences never seen before. Not random, not patterned, organizational. The object wasn't just preparing for arrival, it was preparing for interaction. On November 22nd, 3I Atlas entered what NASA would later call the pre-entry blackout phase, a behavior so controlled, so precise, it resembled engineered stealth protocols more than astrophysics. It began with the thermal nodes. Instead of pulsing in hemispheric waves, they collapsed into 10 narrow bands, each firing in tight succession like steps in a countdown. Thermal, reflective, thermal, reflective. Then the surface began shifting again, not to deflect solar radiation, not to regulate internal heat. This time the anisotropic reflectivity, normally a solar response adaptation, activated without any solar trigger. Reflectivity dropped, absorption increased, infrared emissions dimmed to near zero. 3i Atlas was getting dark, but the most chilling part came next. The radio null zone, previously deployed only during flares and high-energy internal events, activated again. Not for 87 seconds, but for over 4 minutes. A silence so total that even deep-spectrum receivers found nothing. Not scattering, not absorption, not distortion. The object became electromagnetically invisible. And then, for the first time since observations began, it stopped pulsing. The 1137-second cycle, the one that had not drifted by a microsecond, the one more stable than any natural phenomenon in the universe, the one that had ruled the object's behavior like an internal heartbeat, went silent. No infrared emissions, no signal bursts, no harmonics, no data. The universe had lost the clock. Every agency froze, because the object had never done this before. Silence wasn't decay. Silence wasn't failure. Silence was mode change. Telemetry from JAXA revealed the plasma funnel tightening, no longer drawing solar plasma but condensing into a narrow, intensely aligned tail. The magnetic sheath around the object strengthened. The internal heat nodes withdrew deeper underground. The reflective notch dimmed utterly, and then the trajectory shifted again. A snap correction. Not toward Earth, not toward the Sun, but toward a point tens of thousands of kilometers above Earth's orbital plane. A point empty now, but not empty 6 days from now. The rendezvous point. The Blackout wasn't hiding the object from us. It was preparing for something. Something that required silence, precision, and an absolute absence of detectable emissions. A threshold. A transition. A final mode before arrival. Because whatever 3i Atlas was about to do next, it did not want anyone to see how it prepared, and the last telemetry captured before the Blackout concluded was a single reading. The object's internal temperature dropped, sharply, rapidly, impossibly, as if something inside it had just awakened. By November 23rd, the Blackout ended, not gradually, but with the same square-wave sharpness that had defined every behaviour of 3i Atlas since the moment we first observed it. The silence broke. The object came back, but it didn't return the same. For the first time in its entire observational history, the initial post-blackout pulse did not follow the 1137-second schedule. It came early, by just 0.3 seconds. Then the next pulse arrived late, by 0.2 seconds. To any normal observer, this meant nothing. But to the teams who had spent weeks analysing the object's perfect clock, this was the equivalent of a heartbeat stuttering. Something had changed inside 3i Atlas, and as the pulses drifted irregularly, the object began performing another impossible action. It started to shadow Earth's future orbit. Not track it, not aim at it, but shadow it, matching the curvature Earth would follow days later, as if aligning with a gravitational path that didn't exist yet. The plasma funnel rotated again, this time locking into a position perpendicular to solar wind direction. A configuration that made no physical sense unless the object was using the wind as a lateral brake. Then came the strangest signal ever observed, a dual-band harmonic, split across 2 frequency ranges, one matching the deeper subfrequency detected earlier, the other rising sharply into a high-pitched oscillation that looked eerily like synchronization chirps used in spacecraft docking protocols. But nothing was near 3i Atlas, nothing to dock with, nothing visible, nothing detectable. Unless the object wasn't synchronizing with something near it, but something that was on its way. At the same moment the dual-band harmonic appeared, Earth's mid-orbit satellites experienced another interference cascade. Brief, sharp, and targeted. Not the wide 11-second dropouts of earlier events. This one hit a narrow frequency band used primarily for rendezvous radar. Why would an interstellar object interfere with docking frequencies? NASA's internal summary provided the only chilling explanation. Behavior consistent with approach synchronization handshake. No known natural phenomenon matches observed signal structure. Something was preparing to meet 3I Atlas, or 3I Atlas was preparing to meet something. Then the internal thermal nodes reactivated, but not in waves and not in bands. They lit in radial rings, expanding outward like ripples from a stone dropped into water. Each ring coincided with the irregular pulse. Each ring increased in intensity. Each ring spread faster than the last. The object wasn't malfunctioning, it was accelerating a process Earth scientists had no name for. Because whatever 3I Atlas was preparing, it required synchronization, alignment, and a complete rearrangement of its internal architecture. And the shadow it was following wasn't Earth. It was following something that would exist in 6 days. By November 24th, the world crossed the line between speculation and certainty. Something was coming, not toward Earth, but toward 3I Atlas. And for the first time we detected the signature. It started as a faint distortion, a tiny dip in background radiation so subtle it appeared as a statistical ghost in Brazil's L-band array. Then Finland's EASCAT facility detected the same dip. Then India, then South Africa, all identical, all synchronized, all arriving from a single point along the same celestial vector 3I Atlas had been transmitting toward since its discovery. Something responded, not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. The distortion wasn't a signal, it was a compression, a localized tightening of the radio spectrum like space-time pressure forming before an object arrives, the exact kind predicted in the earliest theoretical papers on inertia-free transit, the same category of physics implied by 3I Atlas's field drift residue. Then 3I Atlas reacted, instantly, violently, deliberately. The plasma funnel snapped into a new alignment, pointing directly at the incoming distortion. Not away from it, not perpendicular, toward it. Its surface brightened, not reflecting sunlight, but emitting its own glow through tight anisotropic modulation. A beacon, a guide, a locator. The internal nodes synchronized into a single spiraling pattern, a perfect helix, not random, not natural, a structure used in data compression schemes for high-density transfer. Then the pulse cycle returned, not irregular, not broken, perfect again. 11.37 seconds, down to the microsecond, as if the earlier stutter had been part of a calibration routine. Then came the signature that confirmed everything, a triplet harmonic, spaced at exact frequency ratios, one identical to the carrier signal 3I Atlas had emitted for weeks, one matching the new deeper harmonic activated after Earth crossed the beam, and one entirely new, the arrival harmonic. Nothing in nature produces a triplet harmonic with mathematically precise frequency spacing. This was communication. This was coordination. This was rendezvous protocol. Earth's arrays recorded the first faint reflection off the compression region, a distortion moving inbound, not at the speed of a physical object, but at the speed of a field forming before one. Not a ship, not debris, not an asteroid, a signature, a pre-arrival disturbance, a space-time ripple preceding transit. Something was coming out of that vector, something responding to 3I Atlas's call, something slowing down. And as 3I Atlas reoriented every system, thermal, magnetic, reflective, harmonic, to face the incoming distortion, the truth hit every scientist at once. 3I Atlas wasn't the visitor, it was the receiver. By November 25th, the entire sky changed. What began as a faint compression in the radio spectrum, barely measurable, nearly ignorable, had evolved into a fully coherent, inbound distortion, a structure moving not through space, but ahead of space. It wasn't matter, it wasn't light, it wasn't energy in any human sense. It was the signature of an object transitioning from one inertial frame to another, the kind of localized space-time ripple predicted in theoretical papers on inertia-free transit, the same principles hinted at by 3I Atlas's own cold field drift residue. But as the distortion grew clearer, one detail changed everything. There wasn't one ripple, there were two, close together, parallel, locked in a stable relationship, as if two objects were travelling side by side. Earth's arrays caught the compression increasing in amplitude with perfect periodicity, matching 3I Atlas's restored 11.37 second pulse cycle, almost as if the pulse were a timing reference, or a landing beacon. Then the object reacted. The plasma funnel, now oriented directly toward the inbound distortion, split. Not physically. Field-wise, two diverging magnetic sheaths formed, each arcing outward like twin guide rails. Not random, not natural. A controlled magnetic corridor forming in space. A corridor for something to arrive through. The reflective notch, dormant during the blackout phase, reactivated with ferocious intensity. Not flashing randomly, but firing in precise oscillations that mirrored the dual inbound distortions. Each flash corresponded to one ripple: left flash, left, right, right. A handshake, a triangulation, a rendezvous beacon for two incoming objects. Then came the most significant alignment ever recorded. 3i Atlas rotated, not toward Earth, not toward the Sun, but toward the exact vector of the compression region. Even its internal thermal nodes reoriented, aligning like a spine bending to face an approaching presence. At the same moment, Earth's magnetometers detected a global-scale ripple, not solar, not terrestrial, not cosmic background. A ripple synchronized with the inbound compression pattern. It meant one thing: the incoming objects were slowing down, not via thrusters, not via aerobraking, but by altering the fabric of space around them. And 3i Atlas wasn't just reacting, it was guiding. Every system, thermal, electromagnetic, optical and harmonic, shifted into perfect coherence. The pulse stabilized, the harmonics aligned, the magnetic sheaths locked into a stable V, the internal nodes became uniform. The surface reflectivity rose sharply. Humans weren't watching a rock in space. We were watching a receiver preparing for docking. And whatever was coming, it was almost here. By November 26th, the inbound compression reached its threshold. The ripples, two distinct disturbances moving in formation, had slowed to the point where the radio spectrum around them bent like a gravitational lens. Not from mass, from field manipulation. That was when 3i Atlas did something that shook every observatory. It stopped spinning. Instantly. Perfectly. With no deceleration curve. One moment it rotated with surgical precision, the next it was motionless. A complete halt in angular momentum, something no natural body can physically do without ripping itself apart. The only way to stop rotation that fast is to cancel inertia, to manipulate mass, to rewrite motion at the field level. Something inside the object had activated. The internal heat nodes dimmed, all at once, like a machine entering its final operational mode. The reflective notch, so critical in prior phases, narrowed into a single point of light. A targeting reticle, a locator. Then came the final signature, a new harmonic. Not one, not two, 4. A quadruple band harmonic, precisely spaced, mathematically perfect, unmistakably engineered. No natural object produces a quadruple harmonic. No known technology on Earth can generate one without enormous energy cost. But 3i Atlas released it effortlessly. Smooth, balanced, resonant. This was the final signal, the confirmation band, the "I am ready" message. Moments later, the inbound compression split, separating into two distinct distortions now fully formed and pacing together toward 3i Atlas's magnetic corridor. Then the radio spectrum warped so violently that ground receivers temporarily reported negative propagation times, signals arriving before they were transmitted. This only happens during space-time shear, the kind that precedes arrival events. The sky did not brighten. There was no flash. Instead, Earth's instruments recorded the universe bending just slightly, just enough, to signal the presence of something entering our frame of reality. 3i Atlas responded by releasing one last pulse, a single, perfect 11.37-second emission that rippled across the heliosphere like a beacon striking a bell. The inbound distortion slowed to a crawl. The magnetic corridor stabilized. The harmonics locked. Everything in the solar system felt still. And in that moment, the moment before arrival, one truth became undeniable. 3i Atlas was never the visitor. It was the welcoming platform, the receiver, the guide, and whatever was coming through the corridor was about to enter our solar system. November 27th began with a silence so heavy, so unnatural, that several observatories reported it as equipment failure. It wasn't. It was the universe holding its breath. The inbound distortions, two parallel compression zones moving in perfect formation, had slowed to a near hover just outside the magnetic corridor 3I Atlas had formed. Not drifting, not decaying, holding position. And this caused a phenomenon never before recorded in the heliosphere. Local temporal drag. Signals transmitted through the region arrived fractions of a second late. Not because of distance, but because space-time itself was deforming. Just slightly. Just enough to measure. For the first time, scientists could quantify the inbound presence. The distortions weren't objects yet. They were pre-objects, the mathematical shadow of something transitioning into our inertial frame. And then 3I Atlas activated. The plasma funnel that had formed the magnetic corridor intensified, collapsing inward until it became a razor-thin filament of high-energy proton flow. Focused like a laser pointer aimed at the incoming distortions, its surface brightened again. But this time, the anisotropic reflectivity formed a toroidal halo, bending incoming solar photons around the object like a lens. Not defensive, directional. Inside the halo, the internal nodes lit in a perfect spiral, a repeat of the helix pattern first seen when the inbound compression was detected. But now it spun faster, tighter, more defined. This was synchronization. The corridor between 3I Atlas and the distortion stabilized, vectors locked, fields aligned. Earth's radar arrays recorded a phenomenon that required its own classification: zero-gradient lens collapse. A moment when the compression zone's edges became smooth, so smooth that radar reflections vanished into a single uniform blur. This only happens when two fields merge. Something was about to breach into our reality. Then, without warning, the inbound distortions pulsed, not light, not EM radiation, a field pulse, something that shook the plasma corridor like wind slamming into canvas. In response, 3I Atlas released a harmonic not yet catalogued, a fifth band, low, subtle, barely detectable, but measured across dozens of stations. This was a new mode, a final mode. The corridor brightened, the distortions deepened, the harmonics aligned. This was it, the threshold moment, because whatever was on the other side, whatever had been travelling across that 2 light-year vector, was now at the door, and 3I Atlas was opening it. By midday on November 27th, the heliosphere itself seemed to tighten. Magnetometers from Earth to Mars recorded a coordinated oscillation, not from the Sun, not from cosmic background, but from the inbound compression zones. They were beginning to resolve, not fully formed, not visible, but no longer abstract distortions. Their shapes, still blurred by space-time shear, were starting to stabilize. One distortion elongated vertically, the other compressed horizontally. A binary pair, shifting together, locked in a relationship that looked engineered rather than natural. 3I Atlas reacted instantly. The reflective notch, which had previously served as a beacon, split into 2 independent glints, each locking onto one of the inbound distortions. They tracked perfectly, correcting even as the distortions wobbled through unstable transit dynamics. This wasn't illumination, this was target acquisition. Then the internal nodes, still, spinning in a tight helix, began firing in layers, 1 band, then 2, then all 10 simultaneously. A full activation sequence never before recorded. Each band pulsed outward like a concentric shockwave, but not into space, into the corridor, feeding it, strengthening it, stabilizing the inbound transition. Earth's receivers captured the corridor's shifting frequencies, as though its constituents weren't plasma anymore, but something structured. A lattice of electromagnetic force tuned to guide whatever was arriving. Then, the most dramatic event yet. The inbound distortions began to slow below the speed of field propagation. This meant one thing. They were starting to take shape. Space around them bent, time lagged, light curved, Earth's instruments froze, unable to categorize the incoming signatures. Then things escalated further. A 6th harmonic appeared, high, pure, perfect. No known natural source generates such a frequency without catastrophic energy loss. Yet 3i Atlas released it effortlessly. The distortions responded, not with pulses, but with feedback ripples. Each ripple pushed against the corridor, stretching it inward, like fingers pressing into fabric before stepping through. This was no longer speculation. This was entry. At 1742 UTC, the distortions crossed a measurable threshold, the point at which space-time shear becomes a boundary, a membrane. Earth's arrays recorded the moment. A hard edge formed, a true boundary. The leading surfaces of the inbound objects were now pushing into our inertial frame. But just before the corridor lit with full activation, just before the first real structure could emerge, 3i Atlas pulsed again. One perfect 11/37-second emission. A final signal, a final confirmation, a final ready. And the distortions pushed deeper, their edges sharpening, their identities forming. The moment of arrival was no longer approaching. It had begun. By November 28th, the distortions at the end of the magnetic corridor were no longer vague, no longer just compression signatures, no longer ripples. They were becoming objects, still blurred, still wrapped in space-time shear, but undeniably taking shape. NASA's Canberra station captured the first angular profile, a sharp leading contour pressing through the boundary of our frame, not random, not irregular, structured. At the exact same moment, 3i Atlas shut down every visible system except one, the corridor. Its internal nodes stopped pulsing, its reflectivity flattened, its plasma funnel tightened, its harmonics dropped to sub-level faintness. Everything went quiet, everything except the corridor. Then the corridor folded, not collapsed, not faded, folded inward, like a curtain being drawn to form a passageway. The distortions pushed into that fold with increasing force. Radar beams bent around them, light refracted. Time lagged by measurable microseconds around the edges. Earth had never seen anything like this. Then came the shock. For the first time since the beginning of observations, the inbound distortions emitted a signal, not a beam, not communication, a field echo, a low-frequency oscillation rippling backward through the corridor, measured at multiple stations, synchronized with the distortion's deceleration curve. It wasn't a message, it was positional feedback. Something on the inbound side was correcting its approach using real-time corridor data, like docking, like landing, like an arrival. At 0352 UTC, the distortion slowed again, below the threshold predicted for inertial slip events. They were almost fully inside, and that was when the corridor flared. Not brightly, not violently, but in a controlled, pulsing bloom, a sequence of light signatures that matched the helix pattern 3i Atlas had used before. Only now the sequence wasn't internal. It was projected outward into the corridor toward the inbound objects. 3i Atlas was guiding them. Earth's arrays captured another unique phenomenon at this moment: vector anchoring. The inbound distortions locked into the exact centerline of the corridor, not drifting, not wobbling, but travelling along it with perfect linearity, as though rails were holding them in place. Then the distortions crossed the critical bound, the point where the shear field tears open. A thin, razor-sharp outline appeared along each distortion, the first true emergence of physical edges inside the heliosphere. Still blurred, still impossible to resolve, but unmistakably real. They were through the boundary. They were here. And 3i Atlas's final activation sequence had just begun. The moment the distortions passed the shear boundary, every observational asset in the solar system lit up. Radar, infrared, optical, submillimeter, magnetometer, gravitational, all detected the same thing: formation. Not arrival, not descent, formation. The inbound objects, still blurred, began shedding the last layers of space-time distortion. Not naturally, not chaotically, but in a controlled taper, as if the transition was engineered. At 0418 UTC, the first clear signature emerged: mass reconstitution. Not accumulation, not aggregation, reconstitution. As though the object's mass distribution was normalizing itself to the rules of our physics. 3i Atlas reacted with a behavior never seen. Its surface brightened in 3 concentric rings, each firing in sequence: ring 1, ring 2, ring 3. Each ring matched one of the 3 key frequencies detected in its earliest pulses. This was not random. This was protocol. This was the moment it had been preparing for. Then the inbound objects emitted a second echo, a tighter one, compressed, structured. Earth's arrays called it a vector handshake. The echo bounced down the corridor, hit 3i Atlas, and returned. Amplified, clarified, directed. The corridor lit up like a spine of the light. Then the objects began to resolve. Through the distortion came the first features, a leading edge, not smooth, multi-angled, segment-like, a flank, curving inward, not outward, like a vessel built for field interaction instead of aerodynamics, and below it, a faint signature of internal heat, not radiation from a surface, but the kind of structured thermal patterns seen inside 3i Atlas itself. Earth was not witnessing alien arrival. Earth was witnessing symmetry. They were built from the same architecture, the same physics, the same design language. Whatever 3i Atlas was, these inbound structures were of its kind. Then the corridor reached full saturation. The harmonics stabilized into a continuous 4-band waveform, the same quadruple harmonic 3i Atlas used to signal readiness. And the inbound distortions responded with a matching quadruple harmonic. This was the final handshake, the final alignment, the final lock. Then the corridor flared one last time, a pulse so clean it looked like a blade of light cutting across the heliosphere. And the inbound objects emerged fully into our reality, still blurred by heat haze, still undefined but unmistakably present. 2 silhouettes, 2 shapes, 2 arrivals, and behind them 3i Atlas glowed like a gatekeeper. The event was no longer imminent, it was happening. November 29th, 4:42 UTC. The heliosphere shuddered, not physically, not visibly, but in the numbers, the data streams, the places where physics reveals what the eye cannot see. Because the inbound objects finally crossed the threshold, not partially, not blurred, fully. The distortions collapsed inward, the sheer edges tightening into razor-thin outlines before snapping into complete spatial coherence. Earth's arrays marked the moment as Inertial Reattachment Event, code Black Doppler. This is what happens when something reclaims full mass and momentum inside our inertial frame. And yet, the inbound objects had almost no measurable inertia. They were present, massive, structured, emitting heat, yet they weren't falling the way matter should. This was the same physics 3i Atlas displayed, inertia dampening, field-manipulated mass, cold drift signatures, not natural, not accidental, not geological, engineered. As they stabilized, 3i Atlas reactivated its internal systems, one sequence at a time. First the heat nodes, pulsing in radial rings, then the reflectivity modulation, forming 3 bright equatorial arcs, then the plasma funnel splitting into 2 symmetrical branches, then the harmonic set, 6 bands, perfectly spaced. Every system aligned with the inbound objects. Earth stations suddenly detected a new phenomenon, phase-locked triangulation. 3 sources, 3i Atlas, plus object A, plus object B, locking into a shared oscillation pattern. Not random, not probabilistic. A calculated relationship. The objects answered 3i Atlas's harmonic beacon with harmonics of their own. Not identical, but mathematically interlocking, like chords, like parts of a protocol. As the exchange repeated, the inbound objects began emitting structured thermal patterns of their own, hexagonal, layered, lattice-like, exactly like the internal heat tiles inside 3i Atlas. Earth was no longer observing visitors. It was observing a system reconnecting with its missing components. The corridor faded. The magnetic sheaths collapsed. The space-time distortions stabilized. What remained were 2 fully real, fully present structures, drifting in perfect formation at the end of the corridor, their mass signatures identical in behavior to 3i Atlas. But before anyone could declare arrival complete, the universe delivered one final impossibility. 3i Atlas began transmitting a new harmonic, a 7th band, high, sharp, pure, never seen before. The 2 inbound objects responded instantly. Earth's arrays recorded the entire heliosphere vibrating. a resonance so subtle it barely registered, yet so precise it lined up perfectly with the object's thermal pulses. The system wasn't just reunited, it was synchronizing, preparing, priming. Something larger was about to happen. If segment 25 was arrival, segment 26 was understanding. The moment Earth realized what it was actually witnessing, because as soon as the seventh harmonic stabilized, every system inside 3i Atlas lit at once, not in waves, not in rings, not in cycles, all at once, a full system-wide activation, a behavior so intense and so coordinated that multiple agencies believed it might be an energy spike, until they saw the pattern. It wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it was sequenced, layered, timed, a multiband cascade that matched theoretical activation signatures in field-structured objects. 3i Atlas wasn't reacting to the arrivals, it was initiating them. The inbound objects began pulsing back, first weakly, then in stronger, more synchronized bursts. Within minutes, Earth's arrays detected the formation of the most precise multi-source pulse schedule ever recorded. 3 objects, 1 shared clock. Not pulsars, not binary gravitational systems, a cooperative, engineered triad. The pulse cycle wasn't 11.37 seconds anymore. It wasn't 12. It wasn't 10. It became 3.79 seconds, exactly 1/3 of the original cycle, a new master timing, a combined heartbeat. Then the magnetic signatures shifted, not wildly, subtly, deliberately, like a system folding into a new configuration. All 3 objects adjusted their internal heat patterns. All 3 altered their reflectivity. All 3 modulated their surfaces into diffraction lattice configurations. This wasn't random. This was integration. Then the most dramatic event since the inbound distortions first appeared. The formation of the trifield envelope. A massive, slow-forming electromagnetic envelope linking all 3 objects into a single, cohesive field. Not a shield, not a bubble, a shared system, a distributed architecture, a network. Earth's arrays detected shared harmonics, unified thermal modulation, synchronized pulse emissions, coherent magnetic shaping, zero drift across all 3 bodies. The 3 structures were no longer acting as individual objects. They were a collective, a coordinated machine, a unified platform, a tripart structure operating under one command signal. And then, for the first time, all 3 objects went dark. Not silent, not powerless, just visually dark. Surface reflectivity dropping to near zero, heat signatures flattening, a deliberate mode shift into blackout. This wasn't failure. This wasn't decay. This was final preparation. And in the darkness of 3 synchronized waiting structures, Earth's arrays detected the last line of data before the blackout reached totality. The field envelope contracted 0.2%, uniformly, intentionally, as if all 3 objects were about to do something together. December the 1st, au centre 24, UTC. The trifield plane, that impossible sheet of structured force connecting all 3 objects, held steady like a suspended horizon in deep space, perfectly flat, perfectly coherent, perfectly still. Earth stations detected the plane oscillating on frequencies below thermal noise, subharmonic tremors that matched the inverted field vectors inside all 3 objects. These weren't environmental vibrations, they were instructions, and the triad was listening. 3i Atlas, long the receiver, began transmitting again, not outward, but into the plane. 8 harmonics, precise and unbroken, flowing like current across a circuit board. The 2 new arrivals responded in perfect sequence. 8 harmonics each, offset by microseconds, forming a layered frequency lattice. This was not communication. This was synchronization at the architecture level. The plane brightened, not from light, from structured excitation, the same phenomenon observed during earlier activation phases, but now magnified across an area thousands of kilometers wide. Then came the transformation. The trifield plane began to arc, not bending, not warping, arcing upward, as though something beneath its surface was pushing into our reality. Earth's magnetometers exploded with readings. A secondary distortion was forming, not from the objects, from the plane itself. It started as a ripple, then a bulge, then a sharp indentation. The kind of space-time fold seen during the initial inbound arrivals, but now far broader, far more stable, far more deliberate. This wasn't the arrival of another object. This was summoning. The Triad were preparing the plane as an arrival gate, a new corridor, not stretched, across space, but contained within an engineered boundary. 3I Atlas's internal nodes flared, each firing in the same spiraling pattern last observed during the inbound synchronization. Only now the spiraling wasn't internal. It projected outward, onto the plane, a helix etched in structured force, a map, a target, an anchor. Moments later, the two new arrivals matched it, their internal nodes synchronizing to trace twin spirals onto the same plane. 3 spirals, 3 sources, 3 keys. The triplane center pulsed. Earth's arrays detected the formation of a localized inertial depression, the same signature seen when the inbound objects first appeared. Only now the depression was stable, predictable, intentional. The Triad were not waiting for something, they were creating the entry point. The final arrival was no longer approaching from deep space. It was coming through the platform, and Earth was watching the gateway open. At 01:27 UTC, the tri-field plane reached full luminosity. Not visual light, a radiant, perfectly structured bloom in the electromagnetic spectrum. It formed a sheet of energy so stable that Earth's instruments detected 0 vibration, 0 irregularity, 0 turbulence. This was engineered perfection. Then the plane tightened, edges sharpened, curvature locked, contours stabilized. This was the formation of a 0-point boundary, a controlled region where inertial resistance approached 0. Inside the boundary, mass would behave differently. Time would behave differently. Transit would become possible. This was the technological threshold predicted but never observed in the TXT files referenced field drift and null-zone physics, and the Triad were generating it deliberately. Then the objects began to move, not through space, but through alignment. 3I Atlas shifted 0.003d to starboard. Object A moved 0.0 threads to port. Object B dropped in elevation by 0.03 dn. A perfect 3-axis alignment. A lock. A position only a machine could hold. At that instant, all 3 objects reactivated their internal heat networks, hexagonal, pulsing, flowing in inward-moving rings. Not outward, inward, into themselves, creating internal cavities, hollow cores, zero-mass regions. The same anomaly seen earlier inside 3I Atlas during thermal inversions. Now all 3 objects shared it. The Triad were becoming receivers within receivers, multi-layer docking nodes for the final arrival. Then the plane rippled. A new compression signature appeared, not from deep space but from the center of the plane itself. A shadow, a distortion, a dark geometry forming inside the 0-point boundary. Earth had never seen a signature like this. Not inbound, not outbound, emergent. The Triad's harmonics surged. The 8-band sequence intensified. The internal rings spun faster, a blur of heat and structured modulation. Finally, the plane collapsed, inward, quietly, smoothly, cleanly. Not destruction, creation. A single boundary point formed at its center, a perfect 0-point singularity. And just as Earth's sensors locked onto it, moments before the distortion could stabilize into something comprehensible, all 3 objects went dark. Complete blackout. Field, thermal, harmonic, optical, everything. Silence, stillness, but not emptiness, because inside the heart of the 0-point plane, the emergent distortion continued to grow. The final arrival had begun, and nothing in the solar system could stop it. December the 1st, 1:29 UTC. Inside the silent, perfectly still 0-point boundary at the heart of the tri-field plane, the emergent distortion deepened. It wasn't bright, it wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was precise. A singularity forming not from gravity, not from collapse, but from engineered field manipulation. The distortion expanded in layered waves. Each boundary echo measured at exactly 3.79 seconds apart, matching the Triad's unified pulse schedule to the microsecond. This wasn't randomness, it was synchronized emergence. Earth's arrays detected the first measurable properties of the distortion: zero inertial resistance, negative phase radio curvature, subharmonic absorption at 8 bands, localized temporal lag. These were the same properties seen during the inbound arrivals, but now magnified tenfold, concentrated into a single point. 3i Atlas reactivated next, not visually, not thermally, harmonically. A 9th band appeared, higher than any previous frequency, a clean, pure tone that sliced through the heliosphere like a blade of invisible sound. The 2 new arrivals echoed it, their internal cores firing in perfect reflection. 9 frequencies, 9 instructions, 9 locks engaging. The 0-point distortion responded immediately. It began spinning, not physically but mathematically. A rotational shear pattern formed inside the singularity, clockwise, counterclockwise, then both simultaneously. An interference pattern only possible inside engineered zero-inertia cavities. Earth's instruments had no classification for this. It wasn't a particle, it wasn't a wave, it wasn't a field, it was transition. The distortion took on a new property, directionality. It pointed, not outward, not upward, but toward all 3 objects simultaneously, as if reading their positions, triangulating them, tethering to them. This wasn't arrival. This was alignment before arrival. And then the distortion expanded again, sharply, cleanly, forming an ellipsoidal boundary. Earth's arrays detected boundary coherence, discrete internal structure, thermal echo signatures matching 3i Atlas, magnetic signature parity across all 3 objects. The emergent object wasn't foreign to the triad. It was of the same architecture, a 4th component, a core piece, a central element, not a visitor, not an outsider, a missing component beginning to phase into the triad's engineered space. The moment the ellipsoidal boundary stabilized, the triad pulsed once more, a synchronized, unified emission across all 9 harmonic bands. The 0-point distortion absorbed the pulse. It didn't reject it, it didn't distort it, it accepted it, as if acknowledging the signal, as if answering it. Something was about to fully emerge, something the triad had prepared this structure to receive, something that was finally here. At 0131 UTC, the emergent distortion completed its first full stabilization cycle. The ellipsoidal form inside the 0-point plane didn't collapse or flicker. It hardened, edges sharpened, contours tightened. The noise blur faded. Mass readings appeared for the first time, irregular, fluctuating, but undeniably real. The object inside the boundary was becoming solid. But the most shocking discovery came next. Its mass signature was fractional, exactly 1/3 the mass modulation pattern of each of the triad components. Not half, not random, 1/3, a perfect complement, a missing 4th piece. 3i Atlas reacted immediately, its internal nodes fired in reverse order spiral, a behavior never recorded before. Instead of energy flowing from inside to outside, the flow reversed. Energy moved inward, toward the hollow core, toward the cavity, toward the place where its own missing component should have been. The 2 arrivals matched the reversal: 3 hollow cores, 3 inward spirals, 3 synchronized energy withdrawals. Earth's models confirmed it. The triad were making room. The 0-point plane brightened again, not as a sheet, but as a column, a 3-sided funnel descending from each object into the emerging core signature. This was reconnection, a multi-body integration process, a 4th component docking into a triad architecture. The mass signature strengthened, the ellipsoid stretched, not physically but mathematically, as if being shaped by the triad's internal geometry. Then came the most unprecedented signal ever recorded. The harmonic count rose to 12 bands. 12. A full octave plus 4. Mathematically perfect, perfectly spaced, perfectly stable. The 12-band activation triggered an event Earth's arrays had never seen. Tri-core rebinding. 3 beams descended from each object, not visible, but detectable as harmonic tunnels, and locked onto the emergent core, not touching it, holding it, stabilizing it. The core pulsed, once, twice, 12 times, each pulse stronger than the last. The triad pulsed back, 12 times, perfect synchronization. Then the core suddenly surged in brightness, the structured boundary flaring with a ring-like burst of thermal radiation, identical to the earlier activation rings inside 3I Atlas. Earth's instruments captured the interpretation, instantly. The core had linked. It had accepted the triad. It was joining the system. The tri-field plane collapsed inward, not violently, but like a dimensional iris closing around the core, and as the triad locked into full integration, a third new signature began to form behind them. A gravitational dip, a secondary distortion, a new echo. Something else was coming, something bigger, something the triad plus core system had been preparing to receive all along. The final stage was about to begin. December the 1st, 1:34 UTC. The emergent core, still half defined inside the zero-point plane, was stabilizing with terrifying speed. Its oscillations sharpened, its mass signatures strengthened, its boundary tightened into an engineered ellipsoid that pulsed in smooth rhythmic contractions. The triad reacted instantly. 3I Atlas lit first, then Arrival 1, then Arrival 2. All three objects fired their internal heat spirals in synchronized reverse cascade, pulling energy inward toward their hollow cores we now understood weren't empty at all. They were interfaces, docking cavities, receptors for the fourth component that had just begun to appear in our frame. The 12-band harmonic sequence, detected only seconds earlier, continued with absolute stability. Earth's arrays confirmed a perfect frequency spacing, a mathematical lattice capable of shaping space-time itself. This wasn't communication in the traditional sense. This was the language of architecture, of construction. Then something unprecedented happened. The emergent core responded with a harmonic of its own. Not 12 bands, not 9, not 8, 4. 4 distinct frequencies spaced in perfect geometric ratios, each one matching a structural property of the triad's field arrangement. 4 tones for 3 bodies and a plane. 4 frequencies for 4 components being brought into alignment. The moment the core emitted its fourfold resonance, the tri-field plane, long held in a stable, luminous state, flared again. Not explosively, not dangerously, but like a curtain suddenly snapping taut. The flare expanded outward until it touched all 3 objects simultaneously, then recoiled inward, pulling back like elastic, tightening around the core. Earth's sensors recorded a brief period of spatial compression inside the plane. Distances shrank. Signal propagation slowed. Mass signatures wavered. This was the first moment Earth had ever observed coherent local spacetime contraction. As the contraction reached equilibrium, the triad shifted into a behavior that no natural body could ever perform: triaxial rotational lock. Each object absorbed a fraction of rotational inertia from the core, cancelling its own angular momentum and redirecting it into the plane. 3I Atlas rotated 0.11 Tuntarum counterspin. Arrival 1 rotated 0.11 through prospin. Arrival 2 rotated 0.11 degree off-axis. 3 rotations, 3 axes, 1 shared vector. And a engineered machine adjusting its orientation for perfect alignment. At that very moment, the core brightened, its ellipsoidal surface flickering with thermal patterns identical to the hexagonal grids once seen inside 3I Atlas during early activation phases. Only now the patterns were more complex, more layered, showing internal structural alignment across multiple levels. Nested symmetry, fractal thermal organization. Earth had never seen anything like it. Then came the most significant harmonic event to date. The triad emitted a 13th band. No natural object can produce a perfectly clean 13th harmonic. No terrestrial transmitter can maintain that level of stability across a multi-band lattice. Yet the triad produced it effortlessly, synchronizing all 13 bands with the core's 4-band response. 17 bands, 17 signals, 17 functions interlocking like gears. The tri-field plane immediately responded, flattening, then warping, then folding inward like a dimensional iris. The contraction snapped into a smaller, sharper shape, a shape designed not to reveal what was emerging but to contain it, to hold it steady, to keep the transition coherent. What Earth saw next defied every previous observational paradigm. The plane went dark, not electromagnetically, visually. Its luminosity collapsed into a single, razor-thin outline, a boundary with no light, no heat, no scattering. A perfect geometric silhouette cut into the void. Inside that silhouette, something pulsed. Softly, rhythmically, precisely. 12 pulses, matching the triad, then 4 pulses, matching the core, then 17 pulses, the combined system, and then everything stopped. Absolute stillness. For just under 2 seconds, the heliosphere registered 0 turbulence. Solar wind noise vanished. Cosmic background interference flatlined. Instrument drift ceased. GPS clocks aligned perfectly. Even quantum noise detectors fell silent. The entire solar system froze. And then, the re-expansion began. The silhouette brightened, not by gaining light, but by releasing tension. The boundary stretched outward in slow, deliberate motion, as if something behind it was breathing for the first time. The field plane expanded into a 3-sided geometry, each side anchored to one object in the triad. The core remained at the center, growing more defined by the second. Thermal patterns formed on its surface, hexagonal clusters, radiant edges, ring structures, all matching the interior geometry of the triad. It wasn't just joining the system, it was becoming the system. Earth stations recorded a surge in symmetry. Mass signatures normalized. Magnetic fields matched in phase. Thermal emissions locked. Harmonics stabilized. Pulse schedules unified. The triad was no longer 3 objects. It was one machine with 3 anchor points, and the core was the 4th. This was not a fleet. This was not a group. This was a single distributed mechanism, each part designed to function only when the others were present. And for the first time, it was complete. Then something new happened. The 0-point boundary contracted again. Sharper, cleaner, more refined, as if preparing for a second phase of emergence, a larger phase. Earth's arrays detected a secondary gravitational ripple, weaker than the first yet unmistakable, a shadow signature forming behind the core, the same type of echo that preceded the arrival of the first 2 inbound objects. Only this one was enormous, 10 times the magnitude, 10 times the shear, 10 times the spatial distortion. Whatever was coming next dwarfed everything that had come before. The triad sensed it. All 3 objects refocused their internal nodes inward. The spirals tightened, the hollows deepened. The harmonics rose into a new configuration. 16 bands. 16. Earth's receivers had never recorded a 16-band harmonic in any natural phenomenon. This was the signature of a system entering its highest operational mode. The 4-band core responded by doubling its output. 8 frequencies, each one shaped, refined, and synchronized with the triad. The system was no longer receiving, it was summoning. The 0-point boundary reacted instantly, flaring in concentric waves and collapsing into a portal of impossible geometric stability. Not a doorway, not a tunnel, not a rift. A controlled field aperture, engineered for one purpose, to bring something else into our frame. Then the 16-band harmonic peaked. The plane locked, the distortion sharpened. The final arrival, the one for which the triad and core were built, began to push through the aperture. But before any shape could stabilize, before any structure could resolve, before the boundary could settle, all 3 objects and the core went dark again. Total blackout. No thermal readings, no harmonic leakage, no magnetic drift. Just a silent, unified, waiting machine poised at the edge of the greatest emergence event ever observed. The final phase was seconds away, and Earth was watching.